Imagine you are invited to, like, a really nice celebratory dinner.
Oh, like the kind where everyone is raising a glass to your success.
Yeah, exactly. The mood is fantastic, the food is great, and you're feeling pretty good about your relationship with the host.
Right, it's a great night.
But then right after the appetizers, the doors lock. The host just slides a contract across the table.
Oh, wow.
And suddenly you realize, this isn't a victory lap at all. It is a really high-pressure intervention.
And honestly, that incredibly stressful, immediate shift in tone, that is exactly the diplomatic minefield Japan's Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi, is walking into today.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking how a single geopolitical crisis, specifically the U.S.-Israeli war with Iran, is creating this massive ripple effect.
Yeah, a ripple effect that is testing the absolute limits of the U.S.-Japan alliance right now.
To really understand what is happening behind closed doors, we pulled a huge stack of sources for you today.
We've got in-depth geopolitical analysis, some recent economic data out of Tokyo, and even some really revealing quotes directly from the Japanese parliament.
And really quickly, before we jump in, just a quick note for you listening. Because we are dealing with active, highly sensitive global conflicts, namely the U.S.-Israeli war with Iran, our goal today isn't to take a political stance.
Right. We aren't here to endorse any military actions or pick a side.
Exactly. We are strictly here to map out the geopolitical chessboard based on the facts and data. We just want to explore the viewpoints in our sources objectively.
So the central event anchoring all of this is the upcoming White House meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Takaichi.
Which is a huge deal because, well, as Japan's first female prime minister, she's already operating under intense scrutiny.
Yeah, and this meeting was supposed to be a total routine show of unity?
Right, a victory lap.
Exactly. It was meant to build on the momentum from Trump's recent visit to Tokyo. They're both aggressively touting this golden era of their alliance.
I mean, Trump even used his signature personal diplomacy. He literally told Takaichi to just call if she needed anything.
But the tone of this upcoming meeting has completely fractured.
It really has. Takaichi isn't going to Washington for a photo op anymore. She is walking straight into a stress test.
And, looking at the data, the sheer scale of the panic in Tokyo didn't quite make sense to me at first.
Really? Why not?
Well, until I looked at the geography of their energy grid, Japan's severe energy dependency is, without a doubt, their absolute Achilles heel.
Oh, totally. I mean, to put this into perspective for you, Japan imports more than 90% of its crude oil from the Middle East.
Right, 90%?
Yeah, over 90%. It's a staggering number.
And if you look at the mechanics of how they actually got to that 90%, it's wild. You see a country that has been methodically backed into a corner by global events.
Oh, you mean like the Fukushima disaster?
Exactly. Go back to 2011. After Fukushima, Japan took almost all of its nuclear reactors offline.
Right, which forced this massive pivot back to fossil fuels just to keep the lights on in the country.
Yeah, and then jump to 2022. Following the invasion of Ukraine, Japan made the decision to sharply reduce its Russian energy imports.
Which was a principled stand, right? They were aligning with their Western allies.
They were. But in doing so, they essentially severed a geographically close energy pipeline.
So they basically put all of their energy eggs into the Middle Eastern basket.
Spot on. And now that basket is sitting directly in the middle of a war zone.
We are talking specifically about the Strait of Hormuz here.
Mm.
When you look at a map, this isn't just a regular shipping lane.
No, it's a massive geographical choke point.
It really is. It's shaped like this inverted V between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. And at its narrowest, it is only about 21 miles wide.
Which already sounds narrow, but the actual shipping lanes that the supertankers can use, those are only 2 miles wide in either direction.
2 miles, that completely blows my mind.
It makes it incredibly vulnerable to asymmetric warfare. I mean, you don't need a massive naval fleet to disrupt a 2-mile wide lane.
Right. Drones, fast attack boats, sea mines, any of that can effectively halt traffic.
And roughly a fifth of the world's total oil consumption passes through that specific bottleneck.
So for an island nation like Japan, which relies almost entirely on imports for raw materials, any disruption in that tiny 2-mile lane immediately reverberates through their entire economy.
And we're already seeing the impact on the ground in Tokyo right now.
Yeah, the sources note that fuel prices in Japan have climbed to multi-year highs.
What are the numbers looking like?
Just this week, average prices hit 190.9 yen per liter. which is, about $1.20 in US dollars.
Ouch. And with that spike in fuel, broader inflationary pressure just bleeds into the entire Japanese economy.
Because food, manufacturing, logistics, literally everything requires fuel to move.
So to try and calm the market and obviously public sentiment, Japan has actually started tapping into its strategic oil reserves.
Right. And the sources point out they maintain reserves equivalent to more than 254 days of consumption.
Which sounds like a lot.
See, I actually have to push back on the comfort that number provides. Well, having 254 days of reserves sounds great on paper, but tapping into it feels like a really temporary, almost psychological Band-Aid.
I see what you mean.
It is like having a really healthy emergency savings account, but suddenly realizing your only source of income just caught fire.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, like you can survive for 8 months, but the clock is ticking really loudly.
Plus, that reserve is mostly unrefined crude oil. The logistics of continuously refining and distributing that in a crisis mode, that just isn't a sustainable long-term economic strategy.
Exactly. And to make matters worse, the fire department, in this case the U.S. military, is demanding Japan pay for the fire hose before they even put out the fire.
Which highlights that this isn't just an economic issue for Japan, it is a fundamental vulnerability in their national security.
Right, because when a country's entire economic engine can be stalled by events thousands of miles away, their foreign policy is no longer entirely their own.
And Washington absolutely knows this dependency is Japan's weak spot. They are actively using it as leverage.
Which pulls us right into the Washington pressure cooker.
Yep, the Oval Office meeting.
If Japan is this desperate to keep the oil flowing through the Strait of Hormuz, the logical assumption is that they should just send their highly advanced military to protect their own ships.
Right. And that is exactly what President Trump is demanding.
He is openly calling on U.S. allies, and specifically calling out Japan, to send warships to help escort vessels through the strait.
Because they need to protect them from regular Iranian attacks.
But the sources point out that Tokyo officials are incredibly anxious right now.
Yeah, because Trump's messaging on this has been highly inconsistent.
One moment, he is urging cooperation and praising the partnership.
In the next moment, he is suggesting that allies need to stop relying on the U.S. and shoulder the burden entirely themselves.
So Japanese officials are constantly scrambling, trying to interpret the shifting demands ahead of this meeting.
And while the U.S. is demanding warships, Japan is pointing to a massive, fundamental legal barrier.
Their pacifist post-war constitution.
Specifically, Article 9.
Right. Now, the wording of Article 9 is incredibly strict. It essentially says that the Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right.
And that land, sea, and air forces will never be maintained.
Over the years, successive Japanese governments have performed absolute legal gymnastics to reinterpret those constraints.
They established the self-defense forces, for one.
Yeah, and they've allowed for limited collective self-defense under very specific, narrow conditions.
But joining a U.S.-led active conflict in the Middle East, that requires extremely steep legal and political hurdles.
They would need parliamentary approval, which would be a massive, messy fight.
And beyond the parliament, the public support for military entanglement in the Middle East is basically non-existent.
Prime Minister Takaichi recently warned Parliament herself that involvement could easily make Japanese citizens targets for terrorism.
But bringing a copy of the Constitution to the White House isn't going to satisfy Washington.
Definitely not. Jeffrey Kingston, he's a professor of Asian Studies at Temple University in Tokyo. He provided a great perspective on this in our sources.
What did he say?
He argues that Trump won't care at all about Japan's internal legal constraints. Kingston says, and I quote, "Trump will ask, are you with us or against us? Are you our deputy sheriff in Asia or not?"
Oh, the deputy sheriff ultimatum, that completely strips away all the diplomatic nuance.
It really does. It reduces a complex, decades-old alliance to just a binary loyalty test.
Kingston also brings up a very fresh cautionary tale, referring to British Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
Right, the Starmer scenario.
Yeah, where Trump recently berated Starmer for not jumping quickly enough to assist the U.S. with this war.
So for Prime Minister Takaichi, walking into a room knowing she could be publicly or privately dressed down by her most important ally, that is a nightmare scenario.
And there is a profound, almost painful historical irony at the center of all this.
Cheers.
That pacifist Constitution Article 9, it wasn't just a spontaneous Japanese invention.
Oh, right.
It was largely drafted by the American occupation forces under General Douglas MacArthur after World War II.
Wow. So the United States literally wrote the law, ensuring Japan could never again wage war or maintain an offensive military.
Exactly. Specifically so, Japan would never threaten the U.S. again.
And now, 80 years later, the United States is fiercely pressuring Japan to abandon the very pacifism the U.S. forced upon them.
Simply because it no longer serves American strategic interests.
That is a massive historical whiplash. The U.S. wrote the rule book, and now the U.S. is angry that Japan is actually following the rules.
It is wild.
So I look at this and see just an impossible trap for Takaichi. Her constitution forbids this combat deployment. The public doesn't want it. The terror risk is real.
Yeah.
So why doesn't she just say no? Why can't she politely decline the deputy sheriff badge?
Because taking a step back and looking at the broader regional map reveals exactly why Japan cannot afford to walk away from the table.
The neighborhood.
Right. Japan's security environment right now is arguably the most severe it has been since the end of the Cold War.
Look at their immediate borders. You have China aggressively asserting itself militarily in the South and East China Seas.
You have North Korea rapidly advancing its ballistic missile and nuclear programs. They frequently fire test missiles directly over Japanese airspace.
Which is terrifying for the public.
And you have Russia maintaining military pressure to the north, especially after Japan aligned with the West over Ukraine.
So they are completely surrounded by heavily armed, unpredictable neighbors.
Exactly. The U.S. security umbrella isn't just a luxury for Japan, it is the absolute core pillar of their national survival.
Without Washington's backing, Japan is incredibly vulnerable.
So Takaichi is caught in a vice. On one side, she has a demanding ally who holds the keys to her country's physical security in Asia.
And on the other side, she has a domestic public that demands a shrewd foreign policy grounded strictly in national interest. They want to resist any foreign military adventures.
She has to appease Trump without deploying combat troops. But she cannot alienate him because she desperately needs him to counter China and North Korea.
How she threads that needle is where the mechanics of Japan's diplomacy get incredibly creative.
It's fascinating. They are employing a series of logistical and financial workarounds.
Basically, to give the United States what it wants without technically breaking their own rules of engagement.
Let's look at the diplomatic context first, because Japan actually has a very unique history with Iran. They are not traditional adversaries.
Right. Driven by those massive energy needs we discussed earlier, Japan and Iran have had relatively stable relations for decades.
Our sources highlight that back in 2019, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe actually traveled to Tehran.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, he became the first Japanese leader in over 40 years to visit. He met directly with the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei.
And the goal there was for Japan to act as a mediator between Washington and Tehran. Right.
Exactly. Now, the initiative ultimately failed, but it really established Japan's historical positioning.
They have always tried to be a diplomatic bridge rather than a combatant in the Middle East.
But mediation isn't going to cut it for the U.S. right now. The White House wants tangible action.
So Japan is offering logistical loopholes. They are exploring legally permissible operations, which essentially means intelligence or surveillance.
They've actually used this playbook before. In 2020, they deployed a maritime self-defense force vessel to monitor shipping lanes near the Strait of Hormuz.
The legal gymnastics there are fascinating.
How so?
Well, by classifying the deployment as research and survey operations to ensure the safety of Japanese-related vessels, they completely bypass the constitutional ban on using force.
Ah, I see. It is military adjacent. It provides the U.S. with valuable situational awareness, but it ensures Japanese personnel are not pulling a trigger.
Exactly. It is being useful without being a combatant.
But the much larger offering, the real mechanism for relieving the pressure from Washington, is financial.
Oh, the massive deal. Japan is preparing to announce a huge new round of investments as part of an already signed $550 billion deal with the U.S.
$500 billion.
Yeah. And the specific areas they are investing in are brilliant when you consider the constitutional constraints.
What are they targeting?
They're targeting cooperation in nuclear energy, liquefied natural gas, and potentially developing crude oil production in Alaska.
Okay, the mechanics of this investment strategy solve multiple problems at once.
Right. By funding Alaskan oil infrastructure, Japan is directly addressing its own energy Achilles heel.
Creating a long-term pipeline that doesn't rely on the volatile Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly. But simultaneously pouring billions into the U.S. energy sector helps stabilize the American economy.
Which is huge because the U.S. needs immense resources to maintain its own stability and project power during its war with Iran.
And the best part for Takaichi is that Japan gets to classify this as economic stabilization and civilian infrastructure investment.
Totally bypassing the parliament's restrictions on foreign military financing.
They are shifting money around so the U.S. can fight without worrying about its own domestic energy inflation.
But they aren't stopping at just civilian infrastructure. They're also dipping their toes into defense manufacturing.
Which is where the political tremors in Tokyo are really starting to shake.
Tokyo is expected to inform Washington that it intends to join the Golden Dome Missile Defense Initiative.
And the way they justify this domestically is entirely based on the definition of the word defense.
Right, because the Golden Dome is an anti-missile system.
By manufacturing interceptors and radar components, Japan can tell its citizens, hey, we're building shields to save lives from incoming attacks.
That clears the pacifist hurdle in the minds of many lawmakers.
However, by taking over the manufacturing of these defensive systems, Japan frees up U.S. manufacturing lines and supply chains.
Allowing the U.S. to focus on building offensive weapons for the Middle East conflict.
It's an indirect, highly effective form of military support.
And this actually follows a massive precedent set late last year. Japan exported a batch of surface-to-air Patriot missiles to the U.S.
Our sources note this was a historic break from Japan's long-held ban on exporting lethal weapons.
They manufactured the missiles under a U.S. license and then shipped them back to America to replenish U.S. stockpiles.
So if we synthesize this entire package for you listening,
Yeah, let's look at the whole picture.
you've got the surveillance ships acting as eyes on the water, the billions pouring into Alaska crude to stabilize the U.S. economy, and the manufacturing of Patriot and Golden Dome interceptors.
Japan's strategy becomes crystal clear.
They're basically offering to fund the expedition, supply the fuel, and forge the shields.
Just as long as they don't have to be the ones holding the swords on the front lines.
Beautifully said. But even just forging the shields is causing massive friction at home.
There was an incredibly telling moment in the Japanese parliament just this week that our sources highlighted.
Oh, the Takeichi quote.
Yes, an opposition lawmaker challenged Prime Minister Takeichi, fiercely questioning her push to loosen these historic restrictions on arms exports.
And Takeichi's reply was incredibly brief, but it spoke volumes. She simply said, "Times have changed."
The gravity of that three-word sentence coming from the leader of Japan cannot be overstated.
It represents a monumental historic pivot.
For three-quarters of a century, Japan defined its global identity through post-war pacifism and economic diplomacy.
So by stating times have changed, Takeichi is publicly acknowledging that the world order that allowed Japan to thrive under that pacifist umbrella is fracturing.
She is admitting out loud that the old rules no longer apply.
A geopolitical crisis in the Middle East puts pressure on global oil. That pressure squeezes Japan's economy through the Strait of Hormuz bottleneck.
The U.S. steps in and uses that economic panic, combined with the looming threat of China and North Korea,
to force Japan to quietly dismantle its historic pacifist policies.
And all of this legal maneuvering, reclassification of weapons, and massive financial transfers are happening behind closed doors.
Disguised as the golden era of an alliance.
So for Prime Minister Takeichi, navigating this Oval Office meeting isn't just about diplomatic pleasantries.
Not at all. It is a high-stakes balancing act of keeping the lights on and the fuel flowing in Tokyo.
Securing the U.S. military umbrella against regional threats.
And doing it all without crossing a constitutional red line that would trigger a political revolt at home.
It perfectly illustrates that in our hyper-connected system, there is no such thing as an isolated conflict.
A disruption in a 2-mile-wide shipping lane in the Middle East literally forces a constitutional crisis in East Asia.
The shockwaves eventually reach everyone.
So for you listening, the next time you look at the price of gas at the pump or read a headline about inflation ticking upward, remember how inextricably linked those numbers are to these behind-closed-doors negotiations.
The stability of the third-largest economy in the world and the geopolitical balance of the Pacific can literally hinge on the interpretation of a single 80-year-old constitutional clause.
And the shifting demands of an unpredictable ally. Which leaves us with a final thought for you to ponder on your own today.
We have seen how a distant energy crisis in the Middle East was enough to make Japan break its historic ban on lethal weapons exports.
Enough to make them pour billions into U.S. infrastructure and essentially help fund American war machinery, all because times have changed.
But what happens to that pacifist constitution if a conflict erupts closer to home?
If push comes to shove in the Pacific, perhaps over Taiwan or the South China Sea, will the deputy sheriff of Asia eventually have no choice but to drop the legal loopholes and finally draw a weapon?
That is exactly the question keeping military strategists awake at night from Washington to Beijing.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the deeper layers behind the daily headlines, and we will catch you next time.